What's up? It's Rick with The Digital Divide. Today we're going to be taking a look at arcades, specifically the death of arcades. Arcades used to be very, very prevalent in the late 80s and early 90s. You could not walk into a mall in the United States or a pizza shop, or most places for that matter, without seeing an arcade. Nowadays, though, the only arcades that are still around for the most part are at beach boardwalks or Dave & Buster's. And there's a lot of reasons why they kind of faded into obscurity, and I'll try to cover some of that today. So one of the biggest reasons that arcades exploded and became so popular is because of competition. You have to realize that back in the early 80s there was no internet, and in the 90s we had dial-up at best, and there really wasn't a whole lot of multiplayer competitive games, especially in the console space. So if you wanted to play against other people, you couldn't jump into an online match. You had to go to a local arcade. And it wasn't just competition either. Arcades provided a social space for people to hang out, make new friends, and just chill with people that have like-minded hobbies. You know, there were so many amazing 4-player arcade cabinets that I can think of off the top of my head that introduced me to some friends when I was in middle school, and it was just so much fun to go chill. Your parents would drop you off, have a couple slices of pizza, play some game, kick some kid's ass in Street Fighter. Two of my favorites were the XMen arcade cabinet. This machine, I can't even tell you how many hours I dropped into it, how many quarters I spent on it. It was just fantastic. I mean, I don't know that I ever actually beat it in the arcade, but I got pretty damn close. And me and my siblings used to play this all the time. Another one was the Simpsons arcade cabinet. This was a really cool 4-player co-op cabinet. I don't think there was ever a console port of either of these games, but they were great examples of how social an arcade environment can be. Outside of the social aspect, I think the other reason why arcades blew up was the cost. At the time, arcade hardware was far beyond anything that you could get it on a home console as far as graphic fidelity is concerned. So if you wanted that experience, you could drive to an arcade, plop in a few quarters, and you were good to go. I mean, at the time, a home console cost a few $100s, while a single arcade machine would cost a couple $1,000s. And again, the graphical fidelity was far beyond anything you could get at home, so the only way to experience that was at the arcades. So cost had a lot to do with it as well, and I think that changed a bit with the release of the original Nintendo. The hardware was nowhere near arcade, but there were ports like the Ninja Turtle game, for example. As you can see here, the graphics don't compare. It is not even remotely as good, but that was the first start, I think, where they started to send arcade ports over that were reasonably close. With the launch of 16-bit consoles like the Super Nintendo, graphics started inching closer and closer towards the arcade counterparts, although they still were not perfect. The Sega Genesis also launched with some very close arcade ports, including Mortal Kombat 2. Arcades started to migrate to 3D graphics, and consoles stepped up with the PlayStation and Sega Saturn systems that featured new polygonal 3D graphics. There were numerous ports made there, although, again, not quite as good as their arcade counterparts. They were still fairly reasonable effect simulations of them, and enough so that a lot of people started playing at home versus going to the arcades. So as consoles got more and more technologically advanced and their ports started looking closer to their arcade counterparts, there was less and less reason to leave your house to go get that experience. But I think there was one big turning point when it came to the demise of arcades, and that was, in my opinion, the Sega Dreamcast. It was the first console to have truly arcade-quality graphics, and Sega even introduced a built-in Ethernet port for online multiplayer, which was a first. Some games on the system, like Soul Calibur, for example, even looked better on the Dreamcast than it did in the arcade, as the Dreamcast had superior hardware at the time, which was the first time that's happened. Ports like House of the Dead 2 on the Dreamcast were arcade perfect. They ran at 60 frames a second, and they were identical to their arcade counterparts. Other games that stood out to me were Marvel vs. Capcom 2. This was another arcade perfect port that I put hours and hours and hours of time into. So at this point, there was no need to go to the arcades, but arcades are always going to hold a special place in my heart. They were fantastic, and some are still around. Like I said, Dave & Buster's is still around. You can go to any beach, and there's always going to be a beach arcade around. But most companies have moved on, including Konami. Konami used to be one of the biggest console manufacturers, and now they mostly make pachinko machines, and they also delve into slot machines. A lot of people are upset by that because they used to be huge in the console space. Their biggest franchise, Metal Gear Solid, is now turned into a slot machine / pachinko machine, which is huge in Japan right now, which is a shame because they have so many good IPs like Silent Hill and Metal Gear Solid, Castlevania. But I digress. Like I said, arcades are always going to hold a special place in my heart. I just wanted to do this quick retrospective on it. If you guys agree with me, give me a like. If you don't, dislike. And thank you for watching. As always, this was a Digital Divide retrospective on the death of arcades.